The phone rang 3 times before Mara Voss picked it up, and the voice on the other end did not waste time on greetings. "You need to leave the building right now." Mara froze with a stack of papers in her hand. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants you alive tomorrow. Get out through the east stairwell, not the elevator." The line went dead. Mara stood alone in the records room of Ashcombe Tower, 17 floors above the city, staring at a phone that had just told her to run. 2 hours ago, this had been a normal audit. Now her hands were shaking. She had taken the job 3 weeks earlier because it paid more than anything she had ever billed. A private family company, they told her, needed a full financial review before a merger. She had expected boring spreadsheets and long nights with coffee. She had not expected men who moved like they owned the air around them, or a boss whose eyes sometimes flashed gold under the office lights. She had told herself it was a trick of the light. She had told herself a lot of things. Mara set down the papers, grabbed her bag, and walked toward the east stairwell, her heels echoing louder than she wanted them to. Behind her, a door opened. She turned. A man stood in the hallway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that fit him like it had been made only for him. His hair was black, his jaw sharp, and his eyes held a stillness that made the hallway feel smaller. This was Draven Ashcombe, the man everyone in the building called Sir, and no one dared call anything else. "Miss Voss," he said, "where are you going in such a hurry?" Her mouth went dry. "I got a call. Someone told me to leave." Something shifted in his expression, quick and sharp, like a blade catching light. "Who called you?" "I don't know." They hung up. Draven's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, and Mara felt an odd pull toward him, like gravity had changed direction. She told herself it was fear. It did not feel like fear. "You're not leaving alone," he said. "Not tonight." "I don't need a babysitter, Mr. Ashcombe." "You need someone who knows what's really going on in this building," he said. "And I think it's time you learned." 3 weeks earlier, none of this would have made sense to her. She had been hired through a small firm that handled financial disputes for wealthy families, the kind of families who preferred discretion over lawyers. The Ashcombe name came with a file so thick it barely fit in one folder. Decades of holdings, land, shipping companies, and charities that never seemed to spend money the way charities should. Her manager had told her only one thing before she signed the contract. Be polite, be quick, and don't ask questions you don't need answered. She had ignored that advice from the very first day. The company occupied the top 4 floors of Ashcombe Tower, a building with more security cameras than a bank and staff who moved with quiet, controlled steps, as if they were listening for something the rest of the world could not hear. On her first morning, Mara had been led into a glass office where Draven Ashcombe sat behind a desk with nothing on it but a single black folder. He had not looked up right away. When he finally did, his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her forget what she had planned to say. "You're the accountant," he had said, more statement than question. "Mara Voss, I was told you needed a full review of the company's books. I need someone who won't be afraid to tell me the truth, even if it's ugly." "I don't do pretty numbers, Mr. Ashcombe, just accurate ones." A small, almost invisible smile had crossed his face then, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Good, then we'll get along." She had not thought much of the strange energy in that first meeting, chalking it up to nerves and the size of the paycheck at stake. But over the following days, small things began to stand out. Employees lowered their voices when Draven walked past. Meetings ended the moment he entered a room, as if his presence alone settled every argument, and more than once, she caught him watching her with an expression that had nothing to do with quarterly reports. By the end of her first week, Mara had uncovered a pattern in the ledgers that made her stomach twist. Money moving in circles, disappearing into accounts with no clear owner, then reappearing months later under different names. It was the kind of thing that ended careers, sometimes worse. She had flagged it quietly, planning to bring it to Draven directly, rather than risk it landing in the wrong hands. She had not expected the wrong hands to already be watching her. Now, standing in the hallway with Draven's dark eyes fixed on her, Mara realized the polite executive she had been reporting to for 3 weeks was not entirely what he seemed. His hand rested lightly on her elbow as he guided her away from the stairwell, and the moment his skin touched hers, she felt something jolt through her chest, sharp and unfamiliar, like a struck match. "You felt that?" Draven said quietly. It was not a question. "Felt what?" He did not answer. Instead, He led her into a private elevator, hidden behind a panel she had never noticed before, one that required a key rather than a card. The doors closed, and for a moment they stood in silence, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him. "I need you to trust me," he said finally, "for the next hour, more than you've trusted anyone in your life. That's a big ask from a man I've known for 3 weeks." "I know." His voice dropped lower. "But someone in this building wants you gone before you finish your audit, and I intend to make sure that doesn't happen." The elevator opened onto a floor Mara had never seen, one without cubicles or desks, just long hallways lined with doors that had no nameplates. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, charged with something she couldn't name. Draven walked fast, and she had to hurry to keep pace, her mind racing through every strange detail of the past 3 weeks, trying to force them into a shape that made sense. They reached a heavy door at the end of the hall. Draven placed his hand flat against a panel, and it slid open without a sound, revealing a room that looked more like a war room than an office, screens covering one wall, each showing a different part of the building. A woman stood near the screens, sharp-eyed, arms crossed, dressed in a fitted jacket that suggested she was used to giving orders rather than taking them. She turned when they entered, her gaze sweeping over Mara with open suspicion. "This is the accountant?" the woman asked. "This is Mara Voss," Draven said, an edge in his voice that silenced whatever else the woman had been about to say. "And she's the reason we finally have proof." "Proof of what?" Mara asked, her patience thinning. "Someone needs to actually explain something to me right now." Draven turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she had met him, his composure cracked, just slightly, enough for her to see something raw underneath. "The numbers you found," he said, "the accounts that don't add up, they belong to someone inside my own circle, someone I trusted. And the call you got tonight wasn't a threat from a stranger. It was a warning, from someone trying to protect you before that person finds out you know." Mara's pulse hammered. "Then why not go to the police?" "Because what we're protecting isn't the kind of thing the police can handle," the woman by the screen said flatly. "Vivian," Draven said, a warning in his tone. "She deserves to know what she's walked into." Vivian shot back. "You brought her into this building. You don't get to keep her in the dark while people plan to hurt her." Draven exhaled slowly, and when he looked at Mara again, something had settled in his expression, a decision made. "There are things about this company, about me, that aren't public," he said. "Things most people would call impossible. I was going to keep you separate from all of it. Just numbers. Okay. Just the audit. But that's no longer an option." "Then tell me," Mara said, standing straighter despite the fear pooling in her stomach. "Whatever it is, I'd rather know than keep guessing." Draven studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much the world was about to change for her. Outside the room, distantly, she heard something that sounded almost like a low growl, carried through the walls, gone before she could be sure she had heard it at all. "Not tonight," he said quietly. "Tonight, I need you safe. Tomorrow, I'll tell you everything, even the parts you won't believe." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers immediately, but exhaustion and fear were catching up with her fast, and something about the steadiness in Draven's voice made her believe, for reasons she couldn't explain, that he meant every word. Vivian moved toward a side door, gesturing for Mara to follow. "There's a room upstairs, secure, no cameras from outside can reach it. You'll be safe there tonight." Mara glanced back at Draven before leaving, and found him already watching her, an intensity in his gaze that had nothing to do with company finances or embezzled funds. It felt personal, almost hungry, though not in a way that frightened her. It unsettled her in a different, harder-to-name way, one that made her chest tighten and her thoughts scatter. "Get some rest," Draven said. "Tomorrow, your questions get answered." As Vivian led her down the hallway, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that whatever waited for her tomorrow would change everything she thought she understood about her quiet, careful life. She thought about the phone call, the warning, the strange gold flash she had dismissed too many times to count. She thought about the way Draven's hand on her arm had felt like lightning finding a place to land. Something enormous was circling just outside her understanding, and for the first time in her very ordered, very numbers-driven life, Mara Voss had absolutely no idea what came next. Behind her, back in the war room, Draven remained still long after she was gone, His hands braced against the edge of a desk, his knuckles pale with the effort of staying calm. Vivian returned a few minutes later, closing the door softly behind her. "You're doing a very poor job of hiding it," Vivian said. "Hiding what?" Draven said, though his voice lacked any real denial. "Whatever this is, the way you looked at her." Vivian crossed her arms. "You've never looked at anyone like that. Not once, not in 10 years. Draven said nothing, because there was nothing safe to say. Since the moment Mara Voss had walked into his office 3 weeks ago, something inside him, something old and instinctive, had refused to settle. It paced, it watched, it wanted. And tonight, when he heard she had received a warning call meant to send her running for her life, that same something inside him had nearly torn free of every careful control he had spent a decade building. He did not yet have the words to explain it to her. He barely had the words to explain it to himself. But he knew, with a certainty that startled him, that whatever waited on the other side of tomorrow's conversation, there was no version of this where he simply let her walk away once she learned the truth. Outside the tower, the city lights blinked on, one by one, as night fully settled in, and somewhere within those walls, unseen and unheard, someone who did not want Mara Voss to survive the week was already making new plans. Mara woke to sunlight, cutting through unfamiliar curtains, and a moment of pure panic before she remembered where she was. The room Vivian had brought her to the night before was simple but comfortable. A bed, a small desk, a window that looked out over the city instead of down into it. She sat up quickly, her mind snapping back to the phone call, the warning, the strange room full of screens, and the man whose eyes had looked at her like she was something rare. She showered and dressed in the same clothes from the day before, since no one had thought to bring her anything else, and by the time she stepped out of the room, Vivian was already waiting in the hallway with 2 cups of coffee. "You're up early," Vivian said, handing her one of the cups. "Most people don't sleep well their first night here." "I didn't sleep well," Mara admitted. "I kept expecting someone to break down the door." "No one is getting through that door," Vivian said simply. "This floor is the safest place in the entire building. Because of cameras or because of something else?" Vivian's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You're sharper than most people who come through here. That's probably part of the problem." Before Mara could ask what she meant, a door at the end of the hall opened, and Draven stepped through it, dressed in a simple dark shirt instead of yesterday's suit, looking like he had not slept much better than she had. His eyes found hers immediately, and that same odd pull settled low in her chest again, steady and warm, refusing to be ignored. "You're awake," he said. "Good. We have a lot to talk about." He led her to a smaller room down the hall, one with a table and windows that let in soft morning light, far less intimidating than the war room from the night before. Vivian followed, but stood near the door rather than sitting, arms crossed, watching everything with careful attention. Draven sat across from Mara and folded his hands on the table, choosing his words slowly. "What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible," he said. "I need you to listen before you decide I've lost my mind. I've worked with enough companies to know impossible things happen with money all the time," Mara said. "Try me." A small, humorless laugh escaped him. "This isn't about money, not directly." He paused. "There are people in this world who aren't entirely human, Mara. People who carry something else inside them. An instinct, a strength, an ability to change. My family is one of those people. I am one of those people." Mara stared at him, waiting for the joke, the explanation, anything that would make the words make sense. None came. Instead, Draven's eyes flickered, just for a second, from their usual deep brown to a bright, unmistakable gold, before settling back to normal. She sat back hard in her chair. "That's not possible. I know how it sounds." "No, I mean I saw that. I saw your eyes do that. Twice now, actually, though I told myself both times I was imagining it." Her voice rose slightly, more from disbelief than fear. "What are you?" "A wolf," Draven said simply. "Not always, but part of me, always." The words hung in the air between them, absurd, and yet somehow, given everything she had witnessed in the last 3 weeks, entirely believable. She thought about the strange energy in this building, the way people moved, the way conversations stopped the moment Draven entered a room. She thought about the low growling sound she had heard through the walls last night. "This whole company," she said slowly, piecing it together. It's not really a company, is it? Not just a company. It's a cover, Vivian said from the doorway. A structure that lets us operate in the human world without drawing attention. Land holdings, shipping routes, charities, all of it exists to support something much older. And the money I found, Mara said, the accounts that don't add up. That's the part I need your help with, Draven said. Someone inside this structure has been stealing from us for months, moving funds meant to support our people into private accounts. It's not just financial damage. That money funds protection, medical care, safe housing for families who can't exist safely in the ordinary world. Whoever is taking it is hurting people who have nowhere else to turn. Mara's professional instincts kicked in despite the surreal nature of the conversation, cutting through her disbelief like a familiar anchor. You think someone close to you is doing this? I know someone close to me is doing this, Draven said, his jaw tightening. I just don't know who yet. And whoever it is knows you're getting close to proving it. That's why the phone call, Mara said. Someone wanted me gone before I finished the audit. Or, Vivian said carefully, someone wanted to scare you into silence rather than actually hurt you. It's possible the call came from someone trying to protect you, not threaten you. Either way, Draven said, you're not safe going back to your apartment until we know who's responsible. Mara opened her mouth to argue, some instinct telling her she needed to hold on to whatever normal life she still had. But the memory of that cold voice on the phone stopped her. How long are we talking about? As long as it takes, Draven said. I know it's a lot to ask. You're asking me to trust an entire world I didn't know existed yesterday morning, on top of continuing to audit the finances of people who might not be entirely human, Mara said, a note of dry humor slipping into her voice despite everything. It's a lot to ask, yes. Something in Draven's expression eased slightly, like her humor had cut through some of the day's tension. You're taking this remarkably well. I'm a numbers person, Mr. Ashcombe. I deal in facts. And right now, the facts are that someone tried to warn me off a case, that you clearly have secrets bigger than tax fraud, and that whatever is happening in these account transfers is putting real people at risk. Panicking won't fix any of that. Vivian's expression shifted into something like genuine respect. I like her. So do I, Draven said quietly, and the words seemed to slip out before he fully intended them, because a faint tension crossed his face immediately afterward, as if he had said more than he meant to. Mara felt her cheeks warm and looked down at her coffee, unsure what to do with the reaction rising in her chest. She told herself it was simply the intensity of the situation, adrenaline mixing strangely with normal human awareness of an attractive man sitting close to her. She refused to consider anything more complicated than that. I want to see the accounts again, she said instead, redirecting the moment back toward familiar ground. If I'm staying here, I might as well keep working. The faster I trace where this money is going, the faster we find whoever is responsible. Draven nodded, clearly grateful for the shift back to practical matters. I'll have everything brought to you. Full access this time, no restrictions. Good, Mara said, because half the reason this took me 3 weeks is that someone's been hiding files from me. Vivian's eyebrows rose. You notice that? I notice everything, Mara said simply. It's the job. For the rest of the morning, Mara worked at the table, while Draven and Vivian handled other matters nearby, occasionally stepping out to take calls in low, urgent tones she couldn't quite hear. She found herself watching Draven more than she wanted to admit, noting the way his shoulders tensed whenever his phone buzzed, the way his eyes occasionally drifted toward her before snapping back to whatever he was doing, as if he were fighting some instinct to simply stay near her instead of attending to his responsibilities. By early afternoon, she had traced a new thread in the financial records, a shell account linked to a name she didn't recognize, receiving transfers just 2 days before each irregular withdrawal she had already flagged. She sat back, staring at the pattern, her pulse quickening with the particular thrill she always felt when numbers finally told the truth. Draven, she called, forgetting formality entirely in her excitement. I think I found something. He was at her side almost instantly, closer than strictly necessary, looking over her shoulder at the screen. His nearness sent a warm current through her again, and this time she noticed him inhale slowly, almost like he was breathing her in rather than simply reading the numbers she pointed to. This account, she said, pointing at the screen, refusing to let herself be distracted by how good he smelled. something clean and warm like cedar. It receives money right before each theft. Whoever controls it either knows in advance when transfers will happen, or is directly involved in making them happen. Draven's eyes scanned the account details, his expression darkening. I recognize this pattern. You know whose account this is? He hesitated, jaw tightening in a way that told her the answer troubled him deeply. I have a guess. And if I'm right, this is going to be far more complicated than either of us expected. Complicated how? Draven met her eyes, and for a moment, the intensity there was not about numbers or theft at all, but something rawer underneath, protective and fierce, in a way that made her breath catch. Complicated, he said quietly, because the person I suspect has access to nearly everything in this building, including you. The words settled over Mara like cold water, and she pushed back from the table slightly, as if putting distance between herself and the screen might make the threat feel less real. Access to me? What does that mean exactly? It means whoever this is has clearance to enter every secure floor, including the one you slept on last night, Draven said, his voice low and controlled, though she could see the effort it took him to keep it that way. It means they could have already known you were staying there. Vivian stepped closer, her earlier relaxed posture replaced by sharp attention. You think it's Colin? Draven's silence was answer enough. Who's Colin? Mara asked. My finance director, Draven said. He's worked for this family for almost 15 years. He has access to every account, every transfer authorization, every piece of the financial structure that keeps our operations running smoothly. If it's him, he's been stealing from people who trusted him completely. You don't sound convinced, Mara said, watching him carefully. I'm not, Draven admitted. Colin has never given me a reason to doubt him. But the account you found matches a signature only a handful of people could access, and he's one of them. Then we need proof, Mara said, falling back into the steady rhythm of her profession. The one place in this entire surreal situation where she felt completely in control. Real proof, not just a pattern that looks suspicious. If we accuse the wrong person, whoever is actually responsible gets more time to hide their tracks. Draven studied her for a long moment, something like admiration crossing his features. You're remarkably calm for someone who found out about werewolves less than 24 hours ago. I'm compartmentalizing, Mara said honestly. If I stop to think about the fact that you might have fur and fangs somewhere under all that composure, I'm going to have a very different kind of morning. So for now, I'm choosing to focus on the numbers. A short laugh escaped him, surprised and genuine, and for a moment, the tension in the room eased. Fair enough. They spent the rest of the day building a careful trail of evidence, cross-referencing transfer times with building access logs, comparing signatures across a dozen different accounts. Mara worked with a focus that surprised even her, pushing aside the strangeness of her situation in favor of the familiar comfort of spreadsheets and numbers that, unlike werewolves and secret societies, always behaved according to logical rules. By evening, a picture had begun to form, though it wasn't entirely the one Draven expected. Look at this, Mara said, turning her laptop toward him. The account tied to Colin's access codes did receive transfers, but the withdrawal patterns don't match his usual behavior. He processes payments in the mornings, always between 8 and 10, but every one of these irregular withdrawals happened late at night, sometimes past midnight. Draven frowned, leaning in closer to examine the timestamps. Colin doesn't work nights. He has young children. He's always gone by 6. Exactly, Mara said. So either someone is using his access credentials without his knowledge, or someone else entirely has found a way to make it look like it's him. Vivian, who had been quiet for most of the analysis, spoke up from her spot near the window. Someone who knows the system well enough to frame him. Someone with access to his login information, Mara added, which means whoever this is has been inside his office, or close enough to steal his credentials directly. Draven's expression turned grim. That narrows things considerably. Colin's office is on the executive floor, secured, limited access. Which means, Mara said slowly, following the logic to its natural conclusion, whoever did this already has high-level clearance in this building. It's not an outsider. The room fell quiet as the weight of that realization settled over everyone. Whoever had orchestrated the theft, whoever had called Mara last night with a warning, wasn't some distant threat lurking outside the tower. They were inside it, moving freely, watching everything unfold. "I need to speak with Colin," Draven said finally, directly and carefully. "If he's innocent, I want him protected, before whoever did this decides he's becoming inconvenient." "And if he's not innocent?" Mara asked. Draven's expression hardened into something colder than she had seen from him before, something that reminded her, briefly and unsettlingly, that whatever gentleness he showed her existed alongside real power and real danger. "Then he answers for what he's done, according to our own laws, not the laws you're used to." Mara didn't ask what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know yet. As evening fell into night, Draven left to meet with Colin privately, leaving Mara alone in the small conference room with Vivian, who seemed to relax slightly once he was gone, as if some tension eased out of the air along with him. "He likes you," Vivian said suddenly, breaking the silence. Mara nearly dropped her pen. "Excuse me?" "Draven. I've known him for years. I've never seen him hover around anyone the way he hovers around you." Vivian studied her with open curiosity. "Has he told you anything about how bonds work, between our kind and the people we're drawn to?" "No," Mara said carefully. "He mentioned it might come up eventually." Vivian's expression turned thoughtful. "It's not something we choose. It's instinct, deeper than attraction, deeper than logic. Sometimes it hits fast, sometimes it takes years to fully surface. But when it happens, it's not something either side can simply ignore." "Are you saying he thinks I'm some kind of, what, destined partner?" Mara asked, equal parts skeptical and unsettled. "I'm saying you should pay attention to how he acts around you," Vivian said simply. "Because I don't think even he fully understands what's happening yet. But I've watched him lead this pack with total control for years, and the moment you walked into this building, some of that control started slipping. That doesn't happen by accident." Before Mara could respond, the door opened and Draven returned, his expression tight and troubled in a way that immediately shifted the conversation's focus. "Colin didn't know," he said without preamble. "He was horrified when I showed him the transfers. His access codes were compromised nearly 2 months ago, though he never noticed anything unusual until now." "Compromised how?" Mara asked. "He believes someone copied his credentials during a system update," Draven said. "Someone with direct access to our security infrastructure." "That's a very short list of people," Vivian said quietly. "It is," Draven agreed, his jaw tight. "And every single name on that list is someone I've trusted for years." Mara watched the strain settle deeper into his shoulders. And despite everything, despite the impossible things she had learned in the last day, she felt a pull toward comforting him that surprised her with its intensity. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the practical problem in front of them. "Then we narrow the list," she said. "Systematically. Cross-reference system access logs against physical presence in the building during each theft. Whoever did this had to be here, in person, at some point to make these transfers untraceable through remote access alone." Draven looked at her with something like gratitude, the tension in his face easing slightly. "You make this feel almost manageable." "It is manageable," Mara said. "It's just numbers and patterns. People always leave traces, even when they think they've covered every angle." As the night wore on and they worked side by side, narrowing possibilities and eliminating names, Mara noticed Draven's attention drifting toward her more and more often, his focus splitting between the investigation and something else entirely, something he seemed to be fighting against with visible effort. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she had far bigger problems than an inconvenient attraction to a man who occasionally turned into a wolf. She was not entirely successful in believing herself. By the third day, Mara had narrowed the list of suspects down to 4 names, each one cross-checked against building access logs, security footage timestamps, and the precise moments each fraudulent transfer had occurred. She sat with the printed sheets spread across the table, red circles marking the moments that mattered, and felt the particular satisfaction of watching a puzzle come together piece by piece. Draven stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that she had stopped pretending it didn't affect her focus at all. 4 names, he said, studying the sheets. 2 of them I would trust with my life. And the other 2? Mara asked. One is new enough that I don't know him well. The other, Draven paused, his expression darkening, is someone who has been unhappy with certain decisions I've made recently. Unhappy enough to steal from his own pack? I didn't think so, but people surprise you. Mara turned to look up at him, noting the exhaustion carved into his features, the way his shoulders carried a weight that went beyond simple business concerns. You care about these people, all of them, even the ones who might have betrayed you. They're not just employees, Draven said quietly. They're family, in every sense that matters. Whoever did this didn't just steal money. They broke something much harder to repair. Before Mara could respond, the door opened, and a man stepped inside, tall and lean, with sandy hair and sharp, watchful eyes. He wore the kind of confident posture that suggested he was used to being taken seriously, though something about his gaze, when it landed on Mara, made her skin prickle uncomfortably. Gareth, Draven said, straightening immediately, his voice carrying an edge of formal authority. Mara hadn't heard from him before. I wasn't expecting you today. I heard about the audit findings, Gareth said smoothly, his eyes flicking briefly toward the papers on the table, before returning to Draven. Thought I should offer my assistance, given my position on the council. Your assistance isn't necessary, Draven said. Mara has this well in hand. Gareth's gaze settled on Mara again, and this time she noticed something calculating behind the polite smile he offered her. The human accountant. I've heard quite a bit about you. All good things, I hope, Mara said, keeping her voice light despite the unease coiling in her stomach. That depends entirely on who you ask, Gareth replied, and though his tone remained pleasant, there was an edge underneath it that made her spine stiffen. Draven stepped slightly forward, subtly positioning himself between Mara and Gareth, a movement so natural it seemed almost unconscious. Was there something specific you needed, Gareth? Just checking on the investigation's progress, Gareth said. The council is understandably concerned about the financial irregularities. They'd like assurance that whoever is responsible will be dealt with swiftly and discreetly. They'll have that assurance once we have solid proof, Draven said, not before. Gareth's smile thinned slightly, though he inclined his head in acknowledgement. Of course. I trust your judgment, as always. His eyes flicked back to Mara one final time before he turned to leave. Miss Voss, I look forward to seeing how thoroughly you complete your work here. The moment the door closed behind him, the tension in the room shifted noticeably, and Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He's one of the 4 names, isn't he? She said. Draven's jaw was tight. Yes. He seemed very interested in exactly how far along we are. He always seems interested in things that concern the council, Draven said, though his tone carried doubt rather than reassurance. It could mean nothing. It could, Mara agreed, or it could mean everything. She turned back to her laptop, pulling up Gareth's access records with renewed focus. Let's find out. It took less than an hour to uncover what she was looking for. Gareth's access logs showed him entering the building on 3 separate nights, precisely matching the timestamps of the fraudulent transfers. Each visit logged well after normal working hours, each one conveniently unaccompanied by any official meeting or scheduled task. Draven, Mara said quietly, turning the screen toward him. I think we found our answer. Draven stared at the screen for a long moment, his expression unreadable, though Mara could see the muscles in his jaw working beneath controlled stillness. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous, in a way she hadn't heard from him before. He's been a council member for 6 years, Draven said. He's fought beside this family. He's shared meals at my table. I'm sorry, Mara said softly, meaning it. I know this isn't what you wanted to find. It's not about what I wanted, Draven said. It's about what's true. And the truth is, he's been stealing from people who trusted him. People whose safety depends on that money existing when they need it most. He straightened, something hardening in his posture, a shift from the man who had been leaning close to her moments earlier, into someone entirely more formidable. We need absolute proof before I confront him. If I'm wrong about this, the consequences will be severe, for everyone. Then we get absolute proof, Mara said. I'll cross-reference every transaction against his personal financial records. If he's been funneling this money somewhere, there will be a trail, no matter how carefully he's tried to hide it. Over the following hours, Mara worked with singular focus, tracing threads of stolen money through shell accounts, offshore transfers, and property purchases registered under names that, upon deeper investigation, all connected back to Gareth through subtle but undeniable links. By the time she finished, the pattern was undeniable. A clear trail leading from stolen PAC funds directly into Gareth's personal holdings, including a substantial property purchase made just weeks after one of the largest fraudulent transfers. "There," she said finally, exhaustion mixing with the sharp satisfaction of a puzzle fully solved. "That's your proof." Draven studied the evidence in silence, and when he finally looked up at her, something had shifted in his expression, gratitude mixed with something deeper, more personal. "You did this in 4 days," he said. "Something my own security teams couldn't manage in months." "I told you," Mara said, offering a tired smile. "Numbers don't lie." "No," Draven agreed quietly, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite her exhaustion. "But apparently people do, even the ones we trust most." He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against hers where they rested near the laptop, and the contact sent a warm current racing up her arm, familiar now after days of similar small touches, though no less overwhelming each time it happened. "Thank you," he said softly, "for all of this." "You're welcome," Mara replied, her voice quieter than she intended, caught somewhere between professional satisfaction and something far less professional stirring beneath it. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the space between them charged with something unspoken, until Vivian's voice cut through from the doorway, breaking the moment cleanly. "We need to move on this immediately," Vivian said, stepping into the room with a grim expression. "Gareth just requested access to the vault records. If he suspects we're close to proving his involvement, he might try to destroy evidence, or worse." Draven straightened immediately, the warmth in his expression replaced by sharp focus. "Lock down the vault. No access without my direct authorization." "Already done," Vivian said. "But Draven, there's something else. Gareth isn't in the building anymore. He left 20 minutes ago, and no one has seen him since." A cold tension settled over the room, and Mara felt her earlier satisfaction curdle into something far more uneasy. If Gareth had realized how close they were to exposing him, there was no telling what he might do next, and the calm, careful investigation they had been conducting suddenly felt far more dangerous than she had allowed herself to consider. "Find him," Draven said, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument. "Now." The search for Gareth turned up nothing for the rest of that day. His phone went unanswered, his home stood empty, and every contact who might have known his whereabouts claimed complete ignorance. Draven paced the war room like a caged animal, his frustration growing with every dead end, while Mara continued digging through financial records, hoping to find some clue about where the stolen money, and the man who had taken it, might have gone. It was late evening when Vivian burst into the room, her expression tight with urgency. "He's been spotted. A property outside the city. One of the accounts you traced back to him, Mara. Someone matching his description was seen there an hour ago." "Then we go now," Draven said, already moving toward the door. "Draven, wait," Vivian said, catching his arm. "If he's cornered, he might do something desperate. We need a careful approach, not a direct confrontation." "I'm not leaving this to chance," Draven said, his voice hard. "He's had access to this pack's secrets for years. If he feels trapped, there's no telling what information he might try to sell, or who he might try to hurt on his way out." Mara stood, closing her laptop with a decisive click. "I'm coming with you." Both Draven and Vivian turned to look at her with matching expressions of surprise and concern. "Absolutely not," Draven said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "I'm the one who traced every account, every property, every shell company," Mara said, keeping her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her stomach. "If there's paperwork there, financial evidence, I'll recognize what matters faster than anyone else. You need me." "She's not wrong," Vivian said, though her tone carried reluctance. "But she stays back from any direct confrontation." Draven's jaw worked as he weighed the argument, clearly torn between logic and some protective instinct that seemed to grow stronger every time Mara found herself near potential danger. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Fine. But you stay close to me, and the moment things feel wrong, you leave immediately. No arguments." "No arguments," Mara agreed, though something in her chest warmed at the fierce protectiveness in his tone. The drive to the property took nearly 40 minutes, tension thick in the car as Draven navigated dark roads with controlled precision, Vivian coordinating quietly on the phone with additional pack members converging on the location from different directions. Mara sat in the back seat, her heart pounding, trying to focus on the practical matter of what evidence they might find, rather than the very real danger they were driving toward. The property, when they arrived, was a modest house, set back from the road, dark, except for a single light glowing in an upstairs window. Draven parked some distance away, and the group approached on foot, moving with a silent efficiency that made Mara acutely aware, once again, of exactly what kind of people she was surrounded by. They found Gareth inside, seated at a kitchen table, with a half-empty glass, and an expression that shifted from surprise to resignation the moment Draven stepped through the door. "I wondered how long it would take," Gareth said quietly, not bothering to stand. "You could have come to me," Draven said, his voice controlled despite the visible tension in his shoulders. "Instead, you ran." "Would you have listened?" Gareth asked, a bitter edge creeping into his tone. "Or would you have simply condemned me the moment her precious numbers pointed my way?" "The numbers didn't lie, Gareth," Mara said, before she could stop herself, stepping slightly forward, despite Draven's earlier instructions to stay back. "You bought property with stolen funds. You accessed the vault records after realizing we were close. That's not a misunderstanding." Gareth's eyes flicked to her, something sharp and resentful flashing across his features. The accountant speaks. "Tell me, Miss Voss, did it ever occur to you that you're meddling in matters far beyond your understanding?" "It occurred to me the moment someone called to warn me off this investigation," Mara shot back, refusing to be intimidated, despite the danger clearly radiating from the situation. "Was that you, trying to scare me away before I found what you were hiding?" Something in Gareth's expression flickered. Guilt, or something close to it. "I never wanted anyone hurt. I only wanted you to stop looking before things went too far." "Why?" Draven asked, his voice quiet now, almost pained. "Why steal from your own people? From families who trusted this council to protect them?" Gareth's composure finally cracked, exhaustion and something like shame breaking through the earlier bitterness. "Because I watched my own family struggle for years while this pack's resources went toward projects I disagreed with. I told myself I was simply taking back what was owed. I told myself it wasn't truly stealing." He looked up, meeting Draven's eyes directly. "I was wrong. I know that now. But knowing doesn't undo what I've already done." The room fell into heavy silence, the weight of confession settling over everyone present. Mara watched Draven's expression carefully, seeing the conflict there, anger warring with something like genuine sorrow for a man he had once considered family. "You'll face the council," Draven said finally, his voice steady despite the visible toll the moment was taking on him. "You'll return what you've taken, every account, every property. And you'll answer for the danger you put innocent people in, including the woman standing in this room." Gareth's eyes moved to Mara one final time, something unreadable passing behind them. "I truly am sorry for that part at least." The confrontation ended without further incident, Gareth surrendering quietly to the pack members waiting outside, his earlier defiance replaced entirely by resigned acceptance of consequences he clearly understood were unavoidable. As they drove back toward the city, the immediate crisis resolved but its emotional weight still heavy in the air, Mara found herself watching Draven's profile in the passenger seat beside her, noting the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "You did the right thing," she said quietly, "handling that the way you did." "It doesn't feel like it," Draven admitted, his voice rough. "It feels like losing someone I thought I knew." "Sometimes doing right and feeling good about it aren't the same thing," Mara said. "But you were fair. You gave him a chance to explain before condemning him completely. That matters." Draven glanced over at her, something soft and grateful passing across his features, despite the day's heaviness. "You've had quite an introduction to this world. Fraud, secrets, confrontations in the dark. I imagine this isn't exactly what you expected when you signed on for a routine audit." A tired laugh escaped her despite everything. "No, definitely not what I expected. Though I suppose I should have known something was strange the first time I noticed your eyes doing that gold-flashing thing." "You noticed sooner than most humans would have," Draven said. "You're remarkably observant." "It's the job," Mara said, echoing words she'd used before, though this time they felt less like a shield and more like simple truth, shared comfortably between two people who had been through something intense together. As the car continued through quiet streets back toward the tower, Draven's hand found hers resting on the seat between them, and this time neither of them pulled away, the contact settling into something warmer than mere comfort, something that felt, despite the exhaustion and danger of the day, remarkably, unexpectedly right. With Gareth's betrayal resolved, and the stolen funds slowly being recovered through a careful legal process the council oversaw quietly, Mara expected her involvement with Ashcombe Tower to wind down naturally. The audit, after all, had been the reason she was hired, and with the fraud exposed, and the guilty party held accountable, there was no obvious reason for her to remain. And yet, days passed, and no one mentioned her departure. She found herself still working from the same conference room, still surrounded by the same quiet, watchful staff, and still, most notably, still finding reasons to be near Draven, far more often than the actual audit required. He would appear during her lunch breaks with coffee exactly the way she liked it, though she couldn't remember ever telling him her preference. He would linger in doorways longer than necessary, finding small excuses to discuss details that could easily have been handled through a simple email. "You know the audit is essentially finished," Mara said one afternoon, watching him hover near her desk with a folder he clearly didn't need to deliver in person. "There are always loose threads," Draven said, though the excuse sounded thin even to his own ears, judging by the slight flush creeping up his neck. Draven. He met her eyes, and for once, didn't try to hide behind professional distance. "I don't want you to leave." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard, though if she were being truthful with herself, she had suspected as much for days. "Because you still need help with PAC finances, or because of something else?" "Something else," he admitted, setting the folder down, and moving closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to hold his gaze. "I've tried to tell myself this is simply professional interest, or gratitude for everything you've done. But that's not honest, and I think you deserve honesty." Mara's heart pounded, though she kept her expression carefully composed, unwilling to reveal just how much his words affected her. "Then be honest. There's a connection between us," Draven said quietly. "Something my instincts recognized the very first day you walked into my office. I've spent weeks trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was simply curiosity, or stress from the investigation. But it hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown stronger every single day." "Vivian mentioned something like this," Mara said carefully. "About bonds. About your kind being drawn to certain people in ways that aren't entirely a choice." Draven's expression shifted, surprise flickering there. "She told you about that?" "She hinted at it." "I didn't fully understand what she meant." Draven exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Mara had come to recognize as a sign of genuine nervousness beneath his usual composed exterior. "Among my people, some connections run deeper than ordinary attraction. They're recognized instinctively, something ancient in us responding to someone who feels, for lack of a better word, essential. I believe that's what's happening between us." "That's a lot to process," Mara said honestly. "A week ago, I didn't know werewolves existed. Now you're telling me some ancient wolf instinct thinks I'm essential to you." "I know it's overwhelming," Draven said. "I'm not asking you to understand everything immediately, or even to feel the same way. I only wanted to be honest, because you deserve that, especially after everything you've already handled with more grace than I had any right to expect." Mara studied him for a long moment, weighing the fear and uncertainty churning inside her against something else entirely. A warmth that had been building steadily since that very first strange meeting in his office, one she had been carefully ignoring in favor of practical matters and professional focus. "I don't know what I feel yet," she admitted honestly. "This is a lot, Draven. Not just you, but everything. Your world, your responsibilities, the fact that you're apparently some kind of king to an entire community I didn't know existed a week ago." "I understand," Draven said, though something like disappointment flickered briefly across his features before he carefully smoothed it away. "Take whatever time you need. I won't push you toward anything you're not ready for." "But you're not going to stop finding excuses to bring me coffee, are you?" Mara said, a small smile tugging at her mouth despite the seriousness of the conversation. A genuine laugh escaped him, breaking the tension considerably. "No, I don't think I can promise that." Over the following days, something shifted subtly between them, an unspoken acknowledgement replacing the careful distance they had both maintained before. Draven no longer pretended his visits were purely professional, and Mara found herself looking forward to those small moments more than she was entirely comfortable admitting, even to herself. She learned more about his world during quiet conversations that stretched later into evenings than either of them intended, discovering the weight of responsibility he carried as leader of an entire community that existed hidden within the ordinary world, families depending on him for protection, resources, and stability that most humans never had to consider. "It's exhausting sometimes," Draven confessed one evening, as they sat together on a small balcony attached to the private floor, city lights spreading out beneath them. "Everyone looks to me for answers, for strength, for certainty, even when I don't feel certain at all." "You handled Gareth's betrayal with more grace than most people would manage," Mara said. "That takes real strength." "It helped having someone steady beside me through it," Draven said, glancing at her with an expression that made her chest tighten pleasantly. "You have a way of making impossible situations feel manageable." "It's the accountant in me," Mara said lightly, though the compliment settled warmly inside her regardless. "Everything looks manageable once you break it down into smaller pieces." "Is that what you're doing with all of this?" Draven asked, gesturing vaguely between them. "Breaking it down into smaller, manageable pieces?" Mara considered the question honestly. Maybe. It's easier than trying to process the entire situation at once. Werewolves, ancient bonds, secret councils. One piece at a time feels less overwhelming. "And what piece are you working through right now?" Draven asked, his voice softer, closer, the space between them shrinking, without either of them consciously deciding to move. "Right now," Mara said, her own voice quieter than she intended, "I'm working through the piece where I'm fairly certain I don't want you to stop looking at me the way you're looking at me right now." Something flared in Draven's eyes, gold flickering briefly at the edges before settling back into warm brown, and he reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, brushing his fingers gently along her jaw. "Then I won't stop," he murmured, and the moment stretched between them, charged and warm, the city lights blurring at the edges of Mara's awareness, as everything narrowed down to the steady warmth of his hand against her skin, and the quiet certainty settling into her chest that whatever this was, whatever strange, impossible connection had drawn them together, she no longer wanted to fight against it. The peace that settled over the following weeks felt almost fragile in its rarity, the kind of calm Mara had learned to distrust after everything that had already happened. She continued her work at Ashcombe Tower, though the audit had long since finished, finding new projects that justified her continued presence, financial systems that could be improved, safeguards that could be strengthened against future fraud. No one questioned why she remained. No one needed to. Her relationship with Draven had deepened steadily, careful and unhurried despite the intensity of whatever connection bound them together. They had shared quiet dinners, long conversations that stretched into early morning hours, and small moments of comfortable closeness that felt, despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding them, remarkably ordinary and good. It was during one such evening, walking together through the quiet garden behind the tower's private residence, that everything shifted violently. The attack came without warning, 3 figures emerging from the shadows near the garden's edge, moving with a speed that marked them immediately as something other than ordinary intruders. Draven reacted instantly, positioning himself between Mara and the threat, before she had even fully registered what was happening. "Get back," he said sharply, his voice carrying an authority and urgency she had never heard from him before. Mara stumbled backward, her heart hammering as she watched the confrontation unfold with terrifying speed. The intruders moved with coordinated precision, clearly trained, clearly prepared for exactly this kind of encounter. Draven fought them with a controlled ferocity that revealed, for the first time in front of her, the true extent of the strength he usually kept carefully hidden beneath his composed exterior. One of the attackers broke away from the main confrontation, moving toward Mara with clear intent, and terror seized her chest as she realized, with sudden horrifying clarity, that this wasn't simply about hurting Draven. She was a target too. "Draven," she screamed, backing away as the figure advanced. Something shifted in Draven's expression as he heard her cry, something primal and immediate replacing his previous controlled fighting style. His eyes flashed brilliant gold, and for just a moment, Mara saw something ripple beneath his skin, an impossible strength surging forward that had nothing to do with careful restraint. He crossed the distance between them in a blur of motion, placing himself directly between Mara and her attacker, with a speed that seemed to defy physical possibility. The confrontation that followed happened too fast for Mara to fully process. A controlled, decisive intervention that ended with the attacker retreating rapidly alongside his companions, clearly recognizing they had lost whatever advantage they believed they held. Silence fell over the garden, broken only by their ragged breathing. Draven turned to her immediately, his eyes still carrying traces of that brilliant gold, his expression fierce with a protectiveness that went beyond simple concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands moving over her shoulders, her arms checking for injuries with barely controlled urgency. "I'm fine," Mara managed, though her voice shook noticeably. "I'm fine, Draven. You got there in time." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tightly, his heart pounding against her ear as she pressed close to his chest. "I almost didn't. If they had reached you before I did." "But they didn't," Mara said, pulling back slightly to meet his eyes, still bright with lingering gold. "You protected me." Draven's jaw tightened, and something in his expression shifted into pained honesty. "I couldn't lose you, Mara. The thought of anything happening to you, it's not something I could survive." The words hung between them, raw and unguarded, in a way neither of them had allowed themselves before, and Mara felt something settle deeply inside her chest, a certainty that had been building for weeks, finally crystallizing into words she could no longer avoid. "I feel it too," she said softly. "Whatever this connection is between us, I've been trying to explain it away as simple attraction, as adrenaline from everything we've been through together. But it's more than that, isn't it?" "Much more," Draven said, his voice rough with emotion. "In my world, we call it a mating bond. It's not something chosen consciously. It's recognized, instinctively, by something deeper than logic or decision. I recognized it in you, the very first moment you walked into my office." "And you've been carrying that alone all this time," Mara said, understanding settling over her with new clarity, explaining weeks of small, intense moments she had noticed but not fully understood. "I didn't want to overwhelm you," Draven said, "or force something onto you that you didn't choose freely." Vivian and several pack members arrived then, security personnel fanning out to secure the area following the attack, and the private moment between them shifted quickly back into practical urgency. But even amid the flurry of activity that followed, questions about who had orchestrated the attack, concerns about further threats, Mara found Draven's hand remaining steady around hers, refusing to release its grip, even as he issued instructions and coordinated security responses. Later that night, once the immediate crisis had settled and security measures had been reinforced throughout the tower, Draven found her again in the quiet of the private residence, exhaustion and lingering adrenaline still visible in both of them. "Who were they?" Mara asked, sitting close beside him on a small couch, still processing the violence of the evening. "We don't know yet," Draven admitted, "but given the timing, so soon after Gareth's exposure, I suspect there are those within our broader community who saw an opportunity in our recent instability. Perhaps rivals hoping to weaken this pack while attention was focused elsewhere." "Am I in danger because of my connection to you?" Mara asked directly, needing the honest answer despite how much she dreaded hearing it. Draven's expression turned serious, though he didn't shy away from the question. "Possibly. Once our bond becomes more widely known, and it will, eventually, some may see you as a vulnerability to exploit, a way to reach me." "That's a frightening thought," Mara admitted. "It frightens me too," Draven said honestly, "but I refuse to let fear dictate what exists between us. I would rather face every threat imaginable beside you than push you away in some misguided attempt to keep you safe through distance." Mara leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, exhaustion finally catching up with her after the night's terrifying events. "Then we face it together." "Together," Draven agreed, pressing a gentle kiss against her hair, his arms tightening protectively around her, as the quiet certainty of their bond settled more firmly between them, stronger now for having survived its first real test against genuine danger. In the days following the attack, security around Ashcombe Tower tightened considerably, and Draven's investigation into who had orchestrated the assault moved forward with quiet, methodical intensity. Mara found herself drawn deeper into a world she was only beginning to understand, meeting members of the wider community for the first time, families who lived carefully hidden lives within the ordinary human world, all of them ultimately depending on the stability and protection Draven's leadership provided. She met Colin properly for the first time since his credentials had been compromised, a quiet, thoughtful man whose gratitude toward her for clearing his name was evident in every interaction. She met healers who worked from a private clinic hidden 3 floors below the tower's public offices, tending to injuries and illnesses that couldn't safely be treated in ordinary hospitals. She met elderly members of the community, who remembered decades of history, stories passed down through generations, about hidden lives, lived carefully, alongside an unsuspecting human world. Through it all, Draven remained close beside her, his earlier hesitance about pursuing their connection, fully replaced by open, steady devotion that left little room for doubt about his feelings. Their bond, once acknowledged, seemed to deepen with remarkable speed, an intensity that occasionally still overwhelmed Mara when she stopped to consider how completely her life had transformed in such a short time. It was Vivian who first raised the topic that would eventually reshape everything that followed. "The council will need to be informed," Vivian said one afternoon, finding Mara alone in the small office she now occupied more permanently within the tower, "about your relationship with Draven. It's not something that can remain private indefinitely, especially now that the bond has been acknowledged between you." "What happens when they're informed?" Mara asked, setting aside the work she had been reviewing. "Traditionally, when an alpha takes a mate, there's a formal recognition process," Vivian explained. "A trial, of sorts, though not violent in the way the word might suggest. The council needs assurance that the mate chosen understands the responsibilities that come with the position, and that she's capable of representing the pack's interests alongside the alpha." "A trial," Mara repeated slowly. "What does that actually involve?" "It varies," Vivian said. "Sometimes, it's simply a series of formal meetings, demonstrations of understanding and commitment. Other times, particularly when the mate isn't originally from our community, the council may require more substantial proof of value and dedication." Mara felt a flicker of unease at the vague explanation. "Are you saying they might not accept me, because I'm human?" Vivian's expression turned careful. "Some members of the council hold traditional views about mates coming exclusively from within our community. Draven's position as Alpha King carries significant political weight, and some believe his mate should reflect that status in ways a human, however capable, might not easily provide." "But you don't believe that," Mara said, reading the subtle disagreement in Vivian's tone. "I believe you've already proven more value to this pack in a few short weeks than some members manage in years of service," Vivian said firmly. "But not everyone on the council will see it that way immediately. You should be prepared for skepticism, perhaps even open resistance." When Mara raised the subject with Draven later that evening, his expression darkened with obvious frustration. "I won't let the council dictate who I choose as my mate. That decision belongs to me, and to you, not to outdated traditions that no longer serve any real purpose." "But if refusing to acknowledge their process creates instability within the pack," Mara said carefully, "wouldn't that ultimately hurt the people you're responsible for protecting?" Draven's jaw tightened, clearly torn between his own convictions and the practical reality of his responsibilities. "You shouldn't have to prove your worth to anyone, Mara, not after everything you've already done for this pack." "Maybe I don't have to prove it for their sake," Mara said thoughtfully, "but maybe I want to, for my own sake. If I'm going to be part of this world permanently, I'd rather earn my place clearly, rather than have it handed to me simply because of who I love." Something in Draven's expression shifted at her words, surprise and admiration mixing together. "You'd willingly face whatever trial they propose?" "I've faced fraud investigations, physical attacks, and the sudden discovery that werewolves are real," Mara said, a small, determined smile crossing her face, despite the seriousness of the conversation. "I think I can handle whatever the council decides to throw at me." The council meeting was called 2 weeks later, a formal gathering of pack elders and representatives from allied communities, all convened within a large hall Mara had never seen before, hidden deep within the tower's oldest section, its walls lined with symbols and history stretching back generations beyond anything she could have imagined a month earlier. Draven stood beside her as the council formally acknowledged their bond, his hand steady around hers despite the weight of scrutiny settling over the room. Vivian stood nearby, her expression carefully neutral though Mara could sense her quiet support beneath the formal composure. An elderly woman at the head of the council table, her expression sharp and assessing, spoke first. The bond between our Alpha King and this human woman has been acknowledged. Before the council extends full recognition, we require assurance of her understanding, her commitment, and her capacity to serve this pack's interests should the need arise. I understand your concerns, Mara said, stepping forward despite the nervous flutter in her stomach, keeping her voice steady and clear. I came into this world only weeks ago, knowing nothing about your traditions or your history. But in that short time, I've helped uncover fraud that threatened resources meant to protect vulnerable families within your community. I've faced physical danger without hesitation, to protect the people I've come to care about. And I intend to keep learning, keep proving myself, for as long as it takes to earn the trust this council requires. A murmur passed through the gathered elders, some skeptical, others visibly impressed by her directness. The elderly woman studied Mara carefully, for a long, tense moment, before finally speaking again. Words alone won't satisfy this council's requirements, she said. A formal challenge will be set, one that tests both capability and commitment. Should Miss Voss succeed, her place beside our Alpha King will be recognized fully and permanently, without further question. And if I fail? Mara asked, refusing to shy away from the possibility, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Then the matter will require further consideration, the elder said simply, leaving the implications deliberately vague, though the weight of what failure might mean settled heavily over the room regardless. Draven's hand tightened around hers, his expression carrying quiet reassurance despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. Whatever happens, he murmured softly, meant only for her. This doesn't change what I feel for you. Mara squeezed his hand back, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her, even as the council began outlining the details of the challenge that would determine, in the eyes of this hidden world, whether she truly belonged among them. The challenge, when the council finally revealed its details, turned out to be far more layered than Mara had anticipated. Rather than a single test, it consisted of 3 separate demonstrations, each designed to assess a different aspect of her suitability, her understanding of the community's history and values, her ability to contribute meaningfully to the pack's well-being, and finally, most daunting of all, her composure and judgment under genuine pressure. The first demonstration required Mara to spend an entire day meeting with families throughout the community, listening to their concerns, understanding the particular challenges they faced, living hidden lives within the human world. She approached it with the same careful attention she brought to her financial work, listening closely, taking note of patterns and needs that might otherwise go overlooked. By the end of the day, she had compiled a detailed proposal, addressing several gaps she had noticed in how community resources were being allocated, presenting her findings to a smaller panel of elders with the same confident clarity she had once used to present financial reports to corporate clients. You've identified inefficiencies our own internal reviews missed, one elder commented, studying her notes with evident surprise. This is thorough work. I care about getting things right, Mara said simply, whether it's numbers or people's actual needs. The second demonstration proved more personally challenging, requiring her to participate in a formal gathering, where she would need to speak publicly about her understanding of the community's traditions and her commitment to upholding them. Standing before dozens of watchful faces, many still skeptical of her presence, Mara drew on every ounce of composure she had developed through years of presenting difficult financial findings to powerful, often intimidating clients. She spoke honestly about her initial fear and confusion upon learning the truth about Draven's world, about the gradual understanding and respect that had grown as she witnessed firsthand the strength and care within this hidden community. She acknowledged the skepticism some still held toward her, meeting it directly rather than avoiding it, promising continued dedication to earning trust rather than expecting it to be freely given. The response, while not universally warm, carried noticeably less hostility than the initial council meeting had suggested, several elders nodding thoughtfully at her words, their expressions shifting subtly from suspicion toward cautious respect. The third and final demonstration arrived without warning, precisely as Vivian had suggested it might, testing not planned understanding, but genuine reaction under real pressure. Mara was working alone in her office late one evening, when the building's alarm system suddenly blared, security lights flashing red throughout the corridors. She moved instinctively toward the exit, only to find Vivian blocking her path, expression serious. "This is real, Mara. Not a test. Someone has breached the tower's lower security perimeter." Mara's heart pounded, though years of handling sudden crises in high-pressure corporate environments kicked in alongside newer instincts developed over recent weeks. "Where's Draven?" "Handling the breach directly," Vivian said. "But there's a secondary concern. The intruders may be targeting financial records, specifically the evidence still stored regarding Gareth's fraud. Records that could implicate others we haven't yet identified." Without hesitation, Mara moved toward the secure records room rather than toward safety, her mind already working through the fastest way to protect crucial evidence before it could be destroyed or stolen. Vivian followed close behind, clearly torn between her instinct to protect Mara and her recognition that the accountant's specific expertise might be exactly what the situation required. They reached the records room just as two intruders were attempting to access the secure servers, and Mara's quick thinking, recognizing the specific access codes needed to lock down the system remotely before physical damage could occur, prevented what might have been a catastrophic loss of evidence. Security personnel arrived moments later, subduing the intruders before serious harm could occur, though the tension of the encounter left Mara's hands shaking with adrenaline long after the immediate danger had passed. Draven found her shortly afterward, relief and pride mixing visibly in his expression as Vivian recounted what had happened. "You could have run to safety," he said, searching her face carefully. "Instead, you protected evidence that matters to this entire community." "I wasn't thinking about the challenge," Mara admitted honestly. "I was thinking about protecting something important. That's just what I do." "I know," Draven said softly, pulling her into a careful embrace. "That's exactly why the council will have no choice but to recognize what I've known since the very first day you walked into my office." The following morning, the council convened once more, and this time, the earlier skepticism had visibly transformed into something far warmer. The elderly woman, who had first questioned Mara's suitability, rose to address the gathered members, her expression carrying newfound respect. "Miss Voss has demonstrated understanding, dedication, and courage under genuine pressure, exceeding every requirement this council established," she announced. "It is the decision of this council that her bond with our Alpha King be fully and permanently recognized, and that she be welcomed as Luna of this pack, with all rights and responsibilities that title carries." A wave of quiet murmurs swept through the hall, mostly approving, though a few faces remained carefully neutral, the process of earning full trust clearly ongoing, rather than instantly complete. But the formal recognition itself carried weight that couldn't be dismissed, and Mara felt tears prick at her eyes as Draven's hand found hers, his expression carrying open pride and relief in equal measure. "You did it," he murmured, close enough that only she could hear. "We did it," Mara corrected softly, squeezing his hand. "Together, remember?" "Together," Draven agreed, and the warmth in his eyes as he looked at her carried a promise that reached far beyond the formal recognition just granted, a certainty that whatever challenges remained ahead, they would face them exactly as they had faced everything since that very first strange, unsettling meeting in his office weeks earlier. Weeks passed following the council's formal recognition, and Mara found herself settling into her new life with a steadiness that surprised her, given how completely her world had transformed since that first ordinary morning when she had walked into Ashcombe Tower, expecting nothing more than a routine financial audit. The community that had once regarded her with cautious suspicion had gradually warmed considerably, many families now greeting her with genuine friendliness whenever she moved through the tower or attended gatherings alongside Draven. The financial systems she had helped rebuild following Gareth's exposure now ran with careful transparency, new safeguards in place to prevent similar fraud from occurring again, and Mara had taken on a permanent role overseeing the community's broader financial well-being, work that combined her professional expertise with a genuine dedication to protecting the families who depended on that stability. Gareth's fate had been decided by the council in the weeks following his confession, a sentence that stripped him of his position and access, while allowing him supervised opportunity to make restitution for the harm he had caused, a decision Draven had fought for personally, believing firmly in accountability without unnecessary cruelty. "He made a serious mistake," Draven had explained to her once, "but he's not beyond understanding the weight of what he did. or working to make amends. I'd rather see him contribute something positive going forward than simply cast aside entirely. Colin, whose name had been briefly and unfairly clouded by suspicion, had returned to his position with renewed dedication, grateful beyond words for Mara's careful work in clearing his reputation completely. He had become, in the months since, one of her closest allies within the tower's daily operations, their shared appreciation for careful, honest accounting, forming an easy professional friendship. It was on a quiet evening, months after everything had first begun, that Draven led Mara up to the tower's private rooftop garden, a space she had visited occasionally before but never at night, when the city lights spread out beneath them like scattered stars fallen to earth. "I wanted to bring you here," Draven said, his voice carrying a nervous energy she rarely heard from him, "because this is where I first realized, fully and completely, what you meant to me. The night of the attack in the lower garden, I stood right here afterward, watching the city, trying to process how close I'd come to losing you, before I'd even properly told you how I felt." Mara turned to look at him, noting the unusual vulnerability in his expression, so different from the composed, powerful Alpha King she had first met months earlier, yet somehow more compelling for its honesty. "I'm still here," she said softly. "We got through it, together." "We did," Draven agreed, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small box, simple and unadorned, though the ring inside caught the moonlight with quiet elegance. "And I find myself wanting to make that permanent, in every sense the human world recognizes, alongside the bond our instincts already confirmed months ago." Mara's breath caught, tears gathering unexpectedly, as she watched him kneel before her, his expression carrying every ounce of sincerity and devotion that had grown steadily between them since that very first tense meeting in his office. "Mara Voss," Draven said, his voice steady, despite the emotion clearly coursing through him. "You walked into my life, expecting nothing more than a financial audit, and instead, you uncovered corruption, faced genuine danger, and earned the respect of an entire hidden community, all while somehow also capturing something in me I never expected to find. Will you marry me, and let me spend the rest of my life proving I deserve everything you've given so freely?" "Yes," Mara said immediately, laughing through unexpected tears, as Draven rose to slip the ring onto her finger, before pulling her into an embrace that held all the warmth and certainty of everything they had built together over the past difficult, transformative months. The community celebration that followed weeks later brought together every family Mara had come to know throughout her time within this hidden world. Elders who had once regarded her with suspicion, now offering genuine warmth and blessing. Younger pack members, treating her with the easy familiarity of someone who had truly earned her place among them. Vivian, standing beside her as she prepared for the formal ceremony that would mark her as Luna in full standing, squeezed her hand with quiet affection. "I knew from that very first day, when his wolf refused to settle the moment you walked into his office, that you were going to change everything for him. For all of us, really. I never expected any of this," Mara admitted, smoothing the fabric of the elegant dress she wore, still faintly amazed by how completely her life had transformed since that first strange, tense audit assignment. "I thought I was just doing a routine job." "Sometimes the most routine beginnings lead to the most extraordinary endings," Vivian said, smiling warmly. "You didn't just balance the books, Mara. You saved this pack, exposed betrayal that could have destroyed us from within, and somehow, along the way, you gave our Alpha King something none of us thought he'd ever find: real happiness, alongside real partnership." As Mara walked out to join Draven before the gathered community, sunlight spilling warm and golden across the tower's rooftop garden, she caught his eyes finding hers immediately. The same intense, unmistakable warmth that had first unsettled her weeks and months earlier now feeling entirely, comfortably like home. Whatever had begun as a simple, ordinary audit had led her somewhere she never could have anticipated, into danger and discovery, into a hidden world of ancient bonds and fierce loyalty, and ultimately, into a partnership built on genuine respect, courage, and love, strong enough to weather every challenge thrown against it. As Draven took her hand before the assembled community, formally declaring her his mate, and Luna, before witnesses who now welcomed her without reservation, Mara felt only certainty, warm and steady, that whatever came next in this extraordinary new life, She would face it exactly the way she had faced everything since that very first phone call warning her to run. Not with fear, but with clear eyes, steady hands, and a heart finally, fully at peace, beside the Alpha King, whose wolf had recognized her from the very beginning.